Mid-90s were a difficult time in the South Australian economy. We'd had a very difficult period of government sector finances. We'd had our state bank and some related financial institutions had basically lost most of the money that the state might have believed it had at its discretion.
The general consensus of opinion was that people left Adelaide, they never came here. And there was a strong fear in the community that people's children were leaving home and would never be seen again. It was a kind of endemic virus of fear that was spread around, and at the same time there was this sense that we were a bit of a rust bucket state and that people looked down on South Australia. It doesn't feel like that anymore, and people forget that the last decade of the last century was a time of relatively, if not recessionary times, but slow and a slightly depressing era for South Australia.
The earliest steps in the formation of the Leadership Foundation came around the mid-1996-97, where the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, now Business SA, ran some workshops to try and lead towards a vision for South Australia, a business-driven vision for South Australia.
There was seen to be a need to lift the capability, the leadership capability, particularly in generations coming up that will be future leaders. And that's where the idea of a leadership program was formed.
At the time I was the Lord Mayor, Sir Eric Neal was the Governor, and Business SA was a catalyst trying to find a way that we could devise that would be a project or a plan or a form that would help us move the state forward.
Business SA had the idea of starting this program, came to see me, and I agreed to be the patron. I thought it was an excellent idea.
The process that gave rise to the structure that became the GLF emerged out of those workshops, those two very, very important workshops. Each ran for half a day. We used an electronic data gathering system so that we could collect information from the 70 or 80 people involved in tables of 7 or 8, I think. We collected that very effectively, so you didn't have to run a 3-day workshop. You ran a half day, then another half day. And when you've got the Premier involved and the Minister for Manufacturing and the Governor involved, as well as 70 selected business leaders from a wide cross-section of the community, that was essential for business vision. I shouldn't paint the picture that it was just the business vision. By that stage, it was really a collective group that sat down. The universities, of course, were involved. People from the public sector were involved. People from community groups were very involved.
There's leadership required, whether it's in business, in industry, or in politics or public life. And clearly there are deficits in the way people are educated and trained within the private and the public sector. People tend very often to be on a train track, a straight linear progression through their career, and very often they have limited experience of what the rest of the world is about.
At that time, Dr. Lomax-Smith was the Lord Mayor of Adelaide, so she had a personal interest in this field, and we were very thrilled that she would provide leadership for the group that was doing the hard yards on framing what would be the essential elements that became the Governor's Leadership Foundation program.
The Governor's Leadership Program encourages people who are moving up the ladder to recognise that the role of their organisation in relation to the wider community. I think that's very important.
We needed leaders who understood, who had relationships and could respect other parts of the community, because unless you can work together, you can really achieve very little. And it's true of the public and private sector, it's true of industry and the not-for-profit sector. You do need to have relationships and the capacity sometimes to walk in other people's shoes and understand what they're doing. So I felt really strongly that we had developed a business model and a plan that would work.
I think we came to some pretty clear views about what the structure might look like, how long we thought it would be, each program would run, what sort of time frames in terms of contact time to do it, what was the start, what was the middle and what was the end. So all of those things came reasonably easily with the group of people sitting around the table.
So the board had an overview of the program, and certainly it had its hands on the resources that had been assembled, but individual projects, and the GLF was one, an obvious one. We actually went to the private sector as well and were able to achieve some direct sponsorship from major corporates. So it had its own funding as well as some funding from the central pool.
Ian Harrison, as the sort of CEO of Business Vision 2010, was right in the mix in terms of this. And David Ashton, who was around in the early stages, played an important role in keeping this thing going in a reasonable direction. The group that was put together initially under the chairmanship of Richard England put a lot of time and energy into making this work, and people like Kate Brennan, who at that stage was head of the Festival Centre, added some really fabulous input from her broad experience. Sister Deidre Jordan, who was then Chancellor of Flinders University, again came with fabulous background in terms of putting elements into a program that really made sense. One of the great enthusiasts was Raymond Michel, who I think understood as well as anybody how important leadership was for this state, and continued to strongly urge and push us towards making sure that this was going to be something that would really work and deliver. Jeremy Schultz, out of the legal business sector of the state, really wanted to see this thing work and deliver. And as a strong advocate, he was encouraging people from within his organisation to be strongly involved.
David Ashton, we'd recruited him, and he was the general manager, so he provided the on-the-ground leadership and management of the program, and he had a very good committee. And that committee did the hard yards of getting the program up to the point where we could select students and put in place an appropriate program of activities for 2000, secure other sponsors, and General Motors was one of the very important ones that came in during that the next period of time. So we effectively got all dressed up, ready to go throughout 1999 for the program launch for the 2000 year, which is the first of the actual intakes of the GLF.
It was a really exciting moment in many ways, because you have this idea that you're going to pull together business leaders or people from the public sector or the not-for-profit sector, but actually pulling them together from different walks of life is like making a cocktail. The chemistry between those people is part of the experience and part of the achievement. And we felt very strongly that we wanted to get the balance and the dynamics right between those people who were involved. And I think that was one of the early wins we had in making sure we didn't get everybody from the public sector or everybody from corporate law firms.
At the very beginning, you were thrown in together into this melting pot of ideas and of backgrounds and experiences. And it took some time to actually understand and get to know each of those individuals. And throughout that period, you got to learn a lot about each individual, both from a professional perspective and a personal perspective. And it's rare that you've got the opportunity to spend that amount of time with 29 or 30 people and get to know them to the extent that you do, that we did in that period of time.
I really felt that it took me right out of my comfort zone. I loved, and I still, I miss to this day actually, the diversity, just the sheer diversity of people that we were able to communicate with, and the ideas that was extraordinary, and I do miss that to a large extent.
Well, my involvement was obviously addressing the participants once or twice during the year, but more particularly I think I had an idea, which has been continued by successive governors, that each month or so, perhaps every 3 weeks, an ambassador comes from Sydney to visit South Australia, because we have a lot of ambassadors in Canberra and they visit all of the states. And the usual thing is, after calling on the Premier and any other appropriate ministers, the Governor puts a luncheon on at Government House. And in my early years as the Governor, if the ambassador for a particular country was coming, we'd hunt around for people who were either doing business for that country or had some connection with the country, and put together a group of 3 or 4 guests to have lunch with the ambassador. Then I had the idea that if we got members of the Governor's Leadership Program in as guests, the ambassador would be talking to 3 or 4 young people who were bright and alert and had ideas of what was happening in the state, and the ambassadors would gain, but also the participants in the program would gain, because they'd be able to talk across the table over lunch to an ambassador from another country and find out what their relationship was to Australia and the rest of the world. Well, I'm delighted that the subsequent governors have continued that program, and I think it's been very important.
Well, the GLF grew rapidly inside BV 2010. It, after 3 years, it was thought that we might. David had done his work. David Ashton had done his work, and we thought that we could recruit a replacement for David to try and take the program to the next level, because I think David ran 3. He ran 2000, 2001, 2002. And so we went recruiting, and we got this applicant from, was then based in New South Wales, a former Adelaide person called Nicky Vincent, and Nicky's application was obviously successful.
Although the organisation had its own constitution and whatever, it was part of that family. And as it matured, the questions were raised is, should this organisation become a separate body of its own?
There were some opportunities for it to move into a group like Business SA, or to move into the government, or to align itself with one of the major providers of education training. And the intent, the very clear view of the board at that time, and it was the right decision, this body needed to be independent. And so the focus on us became one of making sure we had the right resources available to the organisation at board level to drive it forward, to keep it on track, to provide the important management support and management leadership. And that's where Nicky became absolutely crucial, her recruitment and the energy that she brought to it.
The Governor's Leadership Program initially, I think, became the Leaders Institute of South Australia, was formed as a separate independent organisation. By that time I'd left Government House, and I was asked to become the first chairman of it, chairman of the board. And Dennis Mutton was on the board, and a few other people who've made a big contribution to the Leaders Institute. And so I spent 2 years, the initial 2 years, as chairing the board of it. If I look back on it, one of my significant contributions was insisting that we have a modest profit and build up some reserves so that we were at all times viable.
Certainly I was involved fairly heavily in making sure that the organisation remained viable as the treasurer initially of the Governor's Leadership Foundation, as it was under Business Vision 2010, and then continued on that role as the treasurer for the Leaders Institute. It wasn't easy because you were flying pretty close to the wind most of the time, and looking for sponsors. And it did run as a pretty lean and mean organisation, and quite frankly still does.
Dennis could tap on almost any door, and the governor could always help. But we had some very, very good directors of the program. And Nicky Vincent herself is, she's very persuasive, I think, in terms of asking quite senior people in government and business to speak. And of course, as people became more aware of the program, I think they were probably delighted to accept the invitation to speak, because they realised it was an important program.
And it was important that we had high calibre people, Chief Justice, Premiers, Ministers, Chairman of boards of companies, Chief Executives of government, and not ever forgetting the role of the state governors played in this process, of being actively involved, generously supportive of their time, and their ability for members of the program to meet quite important people that visit the state. Sir Eric and all those that came after him, Marjorie Nelson-Jackson and Kevin Scarce it's more than just having their name on the program. They have been active supporters of the program in a very unselfish way.
It took people from a narrow background and exposed them to new experiences, and I think broadening people's horizons was cleverly managed. I don't think people always understood at the time what actually was happening to them. I think the changes were quite subtle.
I absolutely believe that the GLF works to produce wiser leaders. Of course, everyone has the option to take on board what you learn through the GLF or to leave it behind, but if you actually endorse it and take it for what it is, there is no question that it is growing wiser leaders, and simply because it produces and provides an avenue that no other course, university course for instance, provides for individuals, and that avenue being bringing together a group of individuals of generally high intellect who come from such different backgrounds that you would never have the opportunity to meet as a group, and certainly to meet over a distinct period of time, over an 11 to 12 month period, where you really get to know individuals in an in-depth way. And the lessons that you learn out of that are quite extraordinary.
One of the things I've done in terms of keeping a bit of an eye on the outputs of the program is that I still have a full set of yearbooks from the program, and every now and again I go back and look through the yearbooks and say, oh, is that what that's very interesting about where they've ended up, where they are now compared to where they were when they did the program, and that's really positive. From my knowledge and understanding of people that have gone through the program, I am absolutely comfortable that this has been a successful exercise and has delivered very broadly for this state.
It was fun. It was definitely fun. I'd have no hesitation in recommending the program to anybody because it was really very fulfilling, very challenging, but very stimulating and very, very worthwhile.
The Governor's Leadership Foundation, or the Leaders Institute as it's now called, has been one of the very great success stories of what Business Vision 2010 was set out to achieve, which was to work out how we could do things that would make this state more prosperous and underpin our society and our standard of living going forward. And the GLF, to tap into that broad sector of the economy, right across all facets of the community, not just the economy, and to bring 30 people or thereabouts together each year, and now they've done this for 13 years. There's over 400 people that would form part of an alumni of groups that have actually worked together for a year and looked at how some issues are challenging for our community and how others perceive those challenges. And so you end up constructing a community of leaders for South Australia that have shared experience, that have actually grown in their own situations and have seen things from the other side, as opposed to just getting pigeonholed into their own area of expertise or profession and arguing that case going forward.
Well, in the decades since the program started, I have met people who've been on the course, and they've always been people who've got a special spark. I've often been surprised because I've met them, liked them, admired them, and then found out they were a GLF graduate. So it's been quite interesting. I haven't systematically followed them, but every time I've found out someone's been on the course, I've just been so proud because they've actually been the sort of people that we as South Australians should be proud of.